We talked about possible legislation related to the Airbnb, and you all directed or suggested that I could get the town attorney involved in drafting something. In the meantime, if you've been following the General Assembly, you know that there's been quite a bit of legislative conversation around Airbnb, and in fact there's a vote tomorrow by the House on a bill, I think it's Senate Bill 1598, which is the Airbnb legislation, which would allow localities to have regulations about where B&Bs could be located, as well as the requirement for permits and the remittance of a lodging tax. I understand from a communication from the Virginia Municipal League late this afternoon that the industry is trying to create some last-minute changes to that legislation, so I have in fact written our delegate and asked him to support the current legislation and resist any of those changes. But in the meantime, I've done some additional checking, and after hearing from Mr. Clark that there was at least one home that he was aware of that was paying lodging tax that did not come under Airbnb legislation. We went back and did some investigation and have determined that our current short-term rental legislation within the code would allow us to require the remittance of the lodging tax without you all having to actually adopt a separate piece of legislation for Airbnb. So I have had the finance director contact, or she's in the process of contacting the several lodging or homes in the town that are being listed on the Airbnb website to indicate to those individuals that there is a requirement under current code for them to remit a lodging tax. We will have to monitor that website with the increased interest in Airbnbs as a way of looking for lodging to see if we are getting a sufficient number that would require you all to actually put in place a form of legislation. What has happened in a number of localities is that there's been such a concentration of homes that are listed on Airbnb that it's created problems within neighborhoods, either with parking or noise or other kinds of things, and that has necessitated the legislation. But at this point, we do not have enough homes that are under this kind of arrangement that I think would warrant it, as long as we have the ability under the short-term legislation to require the remittance of the lodging tax. So that's the way we're going to proceed, rather than bringing you a separate piece of legislation. So I think that's kind of good news.
Mm-hmm. Yes,
So
The less you have to regulate, the better.
the Airbnbs in the town limits will be asking for a lodging tax.
Yes.
They will be
And they will be receiving, if they haven't received it already, a letter from the town indicating that under short-term rental they are required to remit that. We're not asking for a separate business license or anything like that. We're not making requirements at this point the way some communities are, that it has to be the primary residence of the of the individual, or limit the number of rooms and other kinds of things that can be discussed. That may be necessary down the road, and in fact, as we have talked about having a hotel study done in the area, one of the things that's being considered is looking at what is the volume of Airbnb registrations in the region, because that may in fact over time be used for short-term rentals as opposed to your traditional hotel lodging. So that's a factor that certainly has to be taken into account. But right now, within the town limits, we only have a handful. So we should just wait and see, I guess, at this point.
So we won't be taking any action at a council meeting?
No, ma'am.